Where are you, you terrible daughter-in-law? Do you think you can just abandon my 60th birthday preparations and get away with it? Get back here right now. My daughter was in an accident on her way to school and was rushed to the hospital. When I arrived, the doctor gave me some harsh news. She's in a critical condition. Those words made my mind go blank. Amidst all this, a text message suddenly arrived. It was sent to our family group chat. Though the message was later deleted, it was already seared into the minds of the family members who had rushed over out of concern for my daughter. My mother-in-law, who always has to be the center of attention, brought about this tragedy with her selfishness. And what miracle happened to me? I met my husband in my late 20s, and we married soon after. I got pregnant right after we got married, so I quit my job and became a full-time homemaker. We had a daughter, and as soon as she could understand things, she started showing interest in everything. She was quick to learn, and my husband and I enjoyed watching her grow, believing she would become a smart young woman. My husband works for one of the top companies in the country, but he never boasts about it and treats everyone fairly. He is well respected by his subordinates, and I'm proud to call him my husband. We believed we were the picture-perfect family. My in-laws, especially my father-in-law, come from a family where someone a few generations back worked hard, got lucky, and amassed wealth in a single generation. My father-in-law was raised strictly by his parents, who always told him not to take being born into wealth for granted. He also attended regular public schools, which gave him a more down-to-earth perspective, and he doesn't judge people based on family wealth. He's a kind and compassionate man, and I can see he raised my husband well. However, my mother-in-law has a strong sense of superiority for marrying into wealth and is rather harsh in nature. She dislikes me because I come from a family that earns less than the national average, and she often treats me harshly because of it. Though she's tough on me, it seems my mother-in-law finds her granddaughter quite adorable. When my daughter does well on a school test or wins an award for her drawings, my mother-in-law dotes on her, saying how proud she is of her smart granddaughter. However, her attitude can change suddenly, and she sometimes treats my daughter with disdain. When my mother-in-law dislikes my daughter, she always lashes out, saying it's because she has my poor blood. I never knew when she would flip that switch, and her mood swings constantly troubled me. My parents divorced when I was young. After that, my father raised me on his own. He quit his well-paying job, which required overtime and working on the weekends, to take a position with regular hours and no overtime so he could be there for me. My dad always said that even though his salary was lower, I was more important to him. That's why I never thought of myself as poor. He even took me on vacations during summer breaks, and I grew up with the same values as any other typical family. But in my mother-in-law's eyes, all she sees is poverty. Of course, I want to talk back to her. It's one thing if it's just about me, but I can't tolerate her bad-mouthing my father and daughter because of me. But I held back because I felt that if I argued, I might have to give up the happy home I have now. I don't want my daughter to experience the loneliness of having a single parent. I never felt lonely being raised by my dad. But honestly, there were times when I wished my mom was around. There are some things you just can't talk about to your father. I kept telling myself that if I endured this unjust situation, it would protect my current happiness. Then one day, tragedy struck my daughter, who had been doing well in both academics and sports and had received praise from her teachers. It was the day my daughter's test results were coming out, and she left home with a confident smile, certain she had aced the tests, but instead, I got a call that she'd been in a car accident. Apparently, a car suddenly veered into the line of children walking to school. Several others besides my daughter were injured and taken to the hospital as well. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. Several parents of the children involved in the accident were already there, and the scene was surreal. Hearing someone sobbing nearby, I couldn't help but imagine the worst for my daughter. When the nurse called me and led me to her room, I found my daughter lying on the bed, asleep. The doctor told me he would speak with us one by one, so while waiting, I contacted my husband and in-laws. All three said they would come right away, but the doctor saw me before they arrived, so I had to hear about my daughter's condition alone. The doctor explained that she had broken her leg and arm. While her life wasn't in danger, she might face significant challenges in her daily life. The doctor said that her arm fracture was particularly complicated and would take a long time to heal completely. I was relieved to know her life wasn't in danger, but she would be bedridden for a while, and her mobility would be limited to a wheelchair. She would also have to endure painful rehab, and thinking about the challenges ahead for her made it impossible for me to feel truly relieved. My husband and in-laws arrived to find me with a worried expression. Could it be? Please, stop thinking about such unlucky things. My husband, concerned about how I was feeling, apologized for leaving me to handle everything on my own and tried to comfort me. He asked me to tell them about our daughter's condition when I was ready, so I took a deep breath and carefully explained what the doctor had told me. When the three of them heard that her life wasn't in danger, they all relaxed. My husband was so relieved that he nearly collapsed to the floor. His father patted him on the back and said, "It's good news, isn't it?" Then, he told me he was glad it wasn't anything too serious. But I couldn't just be happy thinking about what lies ahead. My father-in-law told me not to carry the burden alone and to rely on the family for support. My husband said he would talk to his company to see if he could arrange shorter working hours. Just as we were all coming together to support each other, my mother-in-law called me over. I told my father-in-law and husband to go ahead to our daughter's room while I followed my mother-in-law to a more secluded spot away from the room. By the way, you haven't forgotten about my 60th birthday celebration, have you? It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, so no changes. Keep it as planned. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard something absurd. Although it's not life-threatening, we're in a hospital. I couldn't believe that, in this situation, she could be concerned about her own celebration. Hey, are you listening? My 60th birthday. I planned it before my granddaughter was hospitalized, so my event comes first, understood? Her insistence made it clear that I hadn't misheard. Sure, it's a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, but there's plenty of time to do it after my daughter is discharged. As long as it's done within the year she turns 60, there shouldn't be any issue. I told her I wanted to prioritize my daughter. My daughter has never been seriously ill or injured before. It's her first time being hospitalized, and it's also her first time sleeping somewhere without her parents nearby. She's surely feeling anxious with all these firsts. I explained that I wanted to stay by my daughter's side as much as possible. You're making a big deal out of just a fracture. Hospitals today have full care, and an amateur like you would only get in the way of her treatment. Indeed, just staying with my daughter wouldn't speed up her recovery. But I can still provide emotional support. As her mother, I want to be there for her, so I didn't back down on prioritizing my daughter. My mother-in-law called me defiant and complained, but I had no intention of giving in this time. I was determined to make my mother-in-law see reason, but she showed no signs of backing down. So I offered to prepare as much as I could in between caring for my daughter, and she reluctantly agreed. My mother-in-law had invited many relatives. Some relatives lived nearby, but since they weren't stay-at-home wives like me, I couldn't ask them to help with the preparations. Some even ran family businesses, and I was the only full-time homemaker. If I looked further, there were others in my position, but I couldn't ask them to travel several hours just for the preparations. So, in between taking care of my daughter, I slowly worked on my mother-in-law's 60th birthday celebration. Although my husband helped around the house, his request for shorter working hours was denied. My husband was already working hard, so I couldn't burden him any further. I drastically cut down on my sleep to focus on the preparations for my mother-in-law's celebration. A few days later, while I was trying to finish up the preparations before visiting hours, I received an urgent call from the hospital. Although I had been told her life wasn't in danger, they now said she was in critical condition. I dropped everything for the celebration and rushed to the hospital. I called my husband and father-in-law from the taxi. They had been on their way to pick up relatives arriving at the nearest station for my mother-in-law's celebration. After hearing that our daughter was in critical condition, my husband and father-in-law explained the situation to the arriving relatives and rushed to the hospital with them. Some of the relatives already knew about my daughter's situation and had asked if they could visit her before my mother-in-law's 60th birthday celebration. Some relatives came directly to the hospital, and many people were gathered in my daughter's room. The doctor explained that when the car crashed, her body might have been thrown up, causing her to hit her head. They had taken an X-ray of her brain when she was first brought in, but there were no abnormalities at that time. However, symptoms can sometimes develop over time. It seemed we were dealing with one of those rare cases. There should have been warning signs if it was a brain hemorrhage. They asked if I had noticed any unusual signs. I had heard that people often experience numbness in their limbs or slurred speech. But my daughter had been mostly bedridden and didn't want to talk much due to the shock of the accident and her injuries. The doctor said that the medication she was on for pain relief might have dulled her responses. They also mentioned that it's not uncommon for these symptoms to appear without any warning signs. The doctor assured me they would do everything they could, but the chances of recovery were very slim. I blamed myself, thinking I was a terrible mother for not noticing even the slightest change in my daughter. My husband tried to comfort me, saying it wasn't my fault since I was doing other things besides taking care of her. Some said that an amateur wouldn't have noticed such subtle changes anyway, but I felt it would have been easier if someone had just blamed me for it. Among the gathered relatives, voices of sadness and helplessness emerged, with comments like, "She's still just a child." And, "Why did this have to happen?" In the midst of all this, every relative's phone in the room suddenly started ringing at once. While there are places in the hospital where phones aren't allowed, my daughter's room wasn't one of them. Since everyone's phones rang at the same time, we all instinctively checked them, thinking something might have happened to a relative who hadn't arrived yet. But it was a message from my mother-in-law. The message read, "Didn't I tell you to prepare for my 60th birthday? What's going on? Where are you slacking off, you worthless slave? Get back here immediately." Although the message was sent to the family group chat, it was clearly directed at me personally. My mother-in-law had taken to calling me a slave. Whenever things didn't go her way, she'd often say things like, "You're just a slave shouldn't talk back," or "Slaves exist to serve their masters." Originally, we were supposed to celebrate my mother-in-law's 60th birthday this afternoon. I had gone to her house early in the morning and had been busy with the preparations. Since some relatives had planned to visit my daughter before heading to my mother-in-law's, there were indeed many relatives in my daughter's room. As long as the relatives arrived by the scheduled time, my mother-in-law didn't care where they were or what they were doing before that. She had also left all the tasks to me while she spent her morning at the salon and spa. When I was informed of my daughter's critical condition, I was able to reach my husband and father-in-law, but my mother-in-law's phone seemed to be off, so I couldn't contact her. That's why she had no idea about my daughter's condition. Unaware of what was happening, she probably returned home in high spirits, only to find the preparations incomplete and me gone. She must have assumed I had run away and sent that angry message. She meant to send it to me directly, but in her haste, she foolishly posted it in the family group chat. That's what I believe happened. The relatives who saw the outrageous message began to murmur among themselves. A few seconds later, my mother-in-law realized her mistake and deleted the message, but everyone had already seen the abusive words, and there was no taking it back. Meanwhile, my father-in-law's face was turning red with anger. He was gripping his phone so tightly that I thought he might crush it with his bare hands. I could see that my father-in-law was trying hard to maintain his composure despite the situation. He gritted his teeth, took a moment to calm down, and then called my mother-in-law. Deleting that message is useless. Everyone saw it and has memorized it. When I get back, we have a lot to talk about. You should regret those insults while you wait. Later, the relatives all said that the way he spoke was so cold it sent chills down their spines. A few minutes later, my phone started ringing. I immediately recognized it because my mother-in-law's ringtone is different. I decided to answer, knowing it would be troublesome if I ignored it. But anticipating a long conversation, I moved to a corner of the room. "How dare you snitch, you slave? Know your place." She seemed to think I had told my father-in-law. But I hadn't done anything like that. I explained that it just so happened the relatives were here, and that my daughter was in critical condition in the hospital. When I mentioned that my father-in-law and husband were also in my daughter's room, my mother-in-law suddenly went quiet. I wondered if even she felt some guilt for her earlier outburst after hearing that my daughter was in critical condition. It was a faint hope, but I wished it to be true. But then she spoke again, and I was disheartened. This is all because of your mistake. So, fix it quickly and get everyone back here at once. My mistake? What? She was the one who turned off her phone, and just apologizing for not knowing would have sufficed. Not that an apology would erase the insult of being called a slave, anyway. When my mother-in-law called, my father-in-law had actually asked me who it was. When I showed him the screen, he asked if I could put it on speaker mode, so I complied with my father-in-law's request. It was the moment when not only my father-in-law but also the relatives learned my mother-in-law's true nature. My father-in-law took the phone from my hand and scolded my mother-in-law, saying, "Did you not understand when I said to regret it? Even a monkey can reflect, but you can't even do that?" After that, my daughter's condition stabilized, and we were relieved. We decided to return to my in-laws' house for the time being. I am deeply grateful to the medical staff for their dedicated care. They said that the rest was up to my daughter's will to live. When we arrived at our home, it was completely dark inside, even though my mother-in-law should have been there. When we opened the door, my mother-in-law greeted us on her knees with tears in her eyes. I jumped to conclusions, thinking I was being left out. I deeply regret saying things I didn't mean. That's what she said, but the relatives gave her cold looks. One person muttered, "Was that really something someone who's sorry would say?" and others started to agree. The relatives knew what she had said on the phone to me, so I thought their reaction was only natural. But I only found out about her critical condition in the second half of the conversation. Even though what she said after finding out wasn't great either, I figured her excuse was somewhat valid, so I decided to support her. My mother-in-law then started nodding, saying, "Yes, yes." But her tears had already dried. Once my husband turned on all the lights around the entrance, I could see her expression clearly. On closer inspection, her eyes weren't red at all for someone who had supposedly been crying. It's such a shame. I really cared about my granddaughter, you know. To think she might leave before me, and she's still in elementary school. What? There's no point in moping forever, right? Life doesn't come back. Let's get back on track and start my party. What on earth is going on in her head? Or has she lost her mind to the point where she can't even understand what's being said? Or is her memory just fuzzy because she's in shock from my daughter's critical condition? My mother-in-law's nonsensical statement left not only me but also the relatives frozen in confusion. This is too cruel for a joke, Mom. Our daughter is alive. Don't pretend you're senile to brush this off, you fool. As a mother, can't you empathize with the fear of losing a child? Your granddaughter is fighting to stay alive. Have you no shame? My husband, who had been silently supporting me until now, finally unleashed his anger on my mother-in-law. On the way back here, my father-in-law had said that he was sure my mother-in-law wasn't really sorry. That's why he told my husband to support me, while he would deal with my mother-in-law. My husband couldn't hold back anymore and had to speak up. He stepped forward to protect me and grabbed my mother-in-law by the shoulders. Shaking her, he pleaded in a tearful voice, "Apologize to her, and apologize to our daughter." Oh. Is that what happened? I thought, well, excuse me. Oh ho 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 ho. My mother-in-law tried to play it off with a flippant attitude, but the relatives were all utterly appalled. It felt like she was making a joke out of my daughter's situation, and I was overwhelmed with anger and sadness. My husband noticed me staggering and caught me in his arms. A few of the relatives stepped forward to shield us, berating my mother-in-law for being so out of line. Finally realizing how serious the situation was, my mother-in-law covered her face with her hands and started screaming. I know I said something awful. But if I don't joke about it, I feel like I'm going to lose my mind. Can't you understand that? She started sobbing loudly. That's fake crying, isn't it? You've always hated me and resented my daughter because of her poor blood, right? You've never cared how it feels to be treated as less than human just for being poor, have you? I had held back from blaming my mother-in-law, hoping she might reflect on her actions. But she trampled all over my consideration. I realized it was pointless to try to help her, and I swore I would never defend her again. Right then and there, my father-in-law told my mother-in-law he wanted a divorce. He said he couldn't live with someone so heartless and that it would be a disgrace to their ancestors to keep her in the family. He asked the gathered relatives to be witnesses. This was to make sure she couldn't deny it later. Then, my husband asked the relatives to witness as well and declared that he was cutting ties with her. He firmly stated that he no longer had a mother. Some of the other relatives also told her never to show her face again. My mother-in-law pleaded that it was unfair, but everyone told her that she was the one who had done wrong. Later, the news reached the key members of both my father-in-law's and mother-in-law's sides of the family. That's when my husband's cousin, who had been distant for years, revealed that his wife had been relentlessly harassed just for being raised by a single parent. He explained that they had no choice but to distance themselves from the family to protect his wife, and those years had been tough. My father-in-law was furious when he found out. He had originally told his wife, who had lived well off his earnings, that she needed to find at least a part-time job and move out within a month. But he quickly retracted that and threw her out of the house with only her essential belongings. My mother-in-law tried to rely on nearby relatives, but they turned her away at the door. She had no choice but to move into a run-down, low-rent apartment that didn't require a guarantor. My mother-in-law, who used to mock me for being poor, is now living in even worse poverty than I ever did. Even in her impoverished state, she hasn't let go of her pride and is reportedly seen as a difficult person at the job center. Naturally, she can't find a job. Given that she's never worked before but has high expectations, it's no wonder she hasn't found anything. When she's desperate, she still tries to go back to my father-in-law, but he always turns her away. I was worried she might show up at our house eventually, but luckily, my husband got transferred. The media is still asking around about our daughter's accident, so things haven't settled down yet. We were advised that it might be better for our daughter to change schools for her future, so we decided to do that. Since then, our daughter's will to live prevailed, and she made a miraculous recovery from her critical condition. She still has some after effects, and there's a tough rehabilitation ahead. But she's very optimistic and has listed several things she wants to do once she's better. My husband and I have vowed to find happiness in our new home, continually uplifted by our daughter's cheerful spirit.